guys, so today's video is coming from a slightly different vantage point of the gym. Usually it's over there. I figured I would put the wall of black belts behind me today just to change things up a little bit. Today's question comes from Elijah, who's asking about building mental toughness. So he sends in the message, says, Chewy, I know you read a lot. I do. What are some good books you recommend to build mental toughness for life and BJJ? I've read your recommendation of The War of Art. I liked it, and I'm looking for more. So, Elijah, thanks for the question, brother. And man, I'll give you a couple books to chew on towards the end of the video, but to be honest with you, bro, I don't think you build mental toughness through reading books. They can give you useful ideas, but ultimately it comes into practice. Now, that's what I want to talk more about for the video for you. So before we get into it, let's talk about what we mean when we say mental toughness, because my definition may be different than yours. So when I think of mental toughness, what I think of is these points where you get your body and mind to a point where it begins to waver, where mentally and physically you want to quit, you want to give up, you want to go away from the thing that you're doing, and then you want to recognize that, you're aware of it, and then two, you're able to override that feeling and continue on to do what you're doing, right? Now, again, everybody's areas of mental weakness, if we'll say that, are different, right? It could be a physical thing, like you're doing jiu-jitsu and some dude's smashing your face and you have this overwhelming feeling to want to quit. That happens for sure. But even people like me who maybe grew up socially awkward when I was younger, I would go into random social situations that were just unknown to me, and they would make me feel really uncomfortable. And even though it wasn't like a physical thing happening to me, there would be this desire to want to get away from it, right? This desire to want to avoid that situation. You know, and obviously if you lift weights, you felt this mental battle going on where you're pushing the weight up in a particular exercise or pulling a weight, and you get to that point where your body says, I want to stop, but you continue on, or you quit either way. Now, I say it's two parts, awareness and then overriding it, right? Awareness to me is important because a lot of times we don't like to be introspective enough to realize that we're weak somewhere. It's not fun to look back and recognize that we sort of fell prey to our emotions. We've all had a situation, I mean, I've had plenty of them, I'm sure you have too, Elijah, where you get into a situation where you act on your emotions, where you just lash out at someone, or maybe you act in a place of fear and you run away from the situation, whatever it might be. We've all done it before and we don't like it. And so awareness is like the first key, being aware that you're being mentally weak in a situation, right? Because a lot of times the emotions can take over and they just run with it. And I think that's important because it's easier to not recognize them and to just kind of go about your day, but it takes strength to just recognize them to begin with, that you're being mentally weak. So that's first. A lot of times in meditation, they'll say, be the watcher, right? You want to watch it come up and see it. Now, second thing is overriding it. So then you get into a situation where you're faced with something uncomfortable. And again, that feeling of you wanting to get away from it, to quit, to give in, whatever it might be, comes up. And then you have the wherewithal to be aware of it. And then you have the ability to override it. Now, for me, growing up and even to this day, the way that I override a lot of times the sort of the uncomfortable situations or the uncomfortable feelings is I think of two things. One is the vision that I have of who I want to be from the situation, because again, we get into things a lot of times because we want something from it. Right? Like when I got into jiu-jitsu, I wanted to be a gold medalist. I wanted to be an MMA fighter. So for instance, when I got into jiu-jitsu, I was terrified of it. Like it scared me. It was an unknown social situation. I was very awkward socially when I was younger. And so getting into it was very nerve-wracking for me. I had to bring two of my buddies with me just so I had someone to latch onto. And when I got in there, I remember even going through the door was tough for me. But I remember thinking of myself, I want to be an MMA fighter. I want to have my hand raised in the ring. I want to be like a competitor in jiu-jitsu, and I want to win. Walk through the door. And that helps get me forward. Now, another sort of vision to this is that I think of things that I don't want to be anymore. So a lot of times I remember when I was younger, it took a lot of mental toughness for me to exercise and basically change myself from being a overweight kid who was unconfident and everything else. And it took a lot of work to do that. And one of the ways that I would do it, whenever I would get to these points where my mind and body would begin to waver, is I would think about the person that I was that I didn't like being, right? This fat, overweight kid who was unconfident, that couldn't get a girlfriend or anything else, wasn't winning in sports, wasn't doing anything worthwhile. And I would think about that, and then it would push me forward, right? Like when it would be hard to go running or pushing the weights or eating the right foods, I'd always go back to that vision. I don't want to be that anymore. I want to change. So here's what I have to do. Now, that may not be the best way for you to do it, but I'm just saying it's good to have some mental mechanism to overcome the mental weakness, right? So that's, to me, like in a nutshell, about building mental toughness. Now, how do you do it? How do you build it up? I'll talk about some books in a second, but really it comes down to, Elijah, is putting yourself in tough situations, uncomfortable situations, and then being ready for the weakness to come up, and then overriding the weakness with whatever means you have, right? And having practice with this, because you're going to fail for sure, just like anything else. It's just like jiu-jitsu. You learn a technique, you try it out when you're rolling, and you're going to flop numerous times, but then eventually you get a hang of it, and then you're able to use it, right? Same thing with developing the mental toughness. You're going to have to use it, and you're going to have to practice it from time to time, and expect it to falter and fail sometimes, but that's okay. It's practice. You're getting better with it. Every time you use it, you become a bit better with it, to the point where eventually it becomes automatic, right? Like just the other day, for instance, that feeling of wanting to give up kicked in a little bit. I was rolling with one of my guys who, at this point, he's about 300 pounds. He's a black belt. He's up there on the wall. He's huge. He's like wrestling around with the tree trunk. And he put knee on belly on me. And I mean, it felt like death. I was already tired that day. And I remember just thinking like, God, I just want to quit right now. I felt the feeling come up. I even like that flash of a thought came up, you know? And I instantly was like, no, I'm not going to give up. And I started fighting even harder, right? I've trained my body to do that. Every time that feeling comes up, I kind of have the opposite reaction. And so again, it becomes stronger with practice. And so what I would encourage you to do, Elijah, is along with books you read, because I'm sure you're reading a bunch, make sure you take some action with those ideas that you're reading in the books. Like you were talking about The War of Art. It's a fantastic book. One of the ideas in that book is resistance, right? Where anytime you try to get out and do something, especially something new, resistance, this sort of ephemeral force in the universe, right, is going to somehow get in your way. And this has been true for me. After reading that book, I realized it, right? Like, it seemed like, I remember when I first started doing these videos, every single time I would try to do the video, like someone would knock on the door, and we've been closed for like an hour or something, and people are knocking on the door, telephones are ringing, everything's happening. I'm like, what is going on? Like, nothing was going on until I started trying to do the video, right? And it kind of works that way. And so, you know, again, that was an idea that stuck with me. And every time those things pop up, I get a little flustered, but I'm like, this is resistance trying to back me up. I just got to keep pushing through. I don't know if you guys can hear that pop. There's a pop or something. Maybe someone's lighting off fireworks. But again, when you read these books, the ones that you're reading, make sure you take the ideas and put them to practice. It's just like jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu techniques are great. They're only effective because you actually practice them against a live resisting opponent. And the mental toughness techniques that you learn through books and the ideas you get from them, they're only really worth something if you put them to practice in your daily life. Now, a couple books that you might think about reading if you're looking for books. One is, at first I wasn't going to listen to it because, like, you know, I heard him talk a couple times, and I don't know, it wasn't my thing at first, but then I listened to the David Goggin book, and I liked it. It was inspirational, right? It was like, it's a guy who's friggin' mentally tough, and he's a badass, and it's fun to just hear about people doing crazy things like that where they're just different in those ways. They're very mentally tough, and it's just inspirational even for me to take some of that away. Now, again, I don't want to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and run, but you can still appreciate some of it, and you can still take ideas away from it. There was a really good book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, which, again, being gritty, right? Like, that's something we all want. That's mentally tough. She talks about the quality of it and how to build it up and everything else. Great book, worth reading or listening if you got Audible account. And then I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, you can get Seneca, Epictetus. Epictetus is probably one of my favorites, just because of the fact that, you know, he was like, that dude was like a slave that became a sought after philosopher. I think it's so cool, right? Like, you know, and he lived his philosophy. Seneca, if you read about him, he was kind of a wealthy dude, right? Good philosopher, obviously, and I like his teachings, but Epictetus like lived it, right? And I just, there's something to that, right? Marcus Aurelius as well. And I like the Stoic philosophy. Obviously, there's things I don't necessarily agree with it, but I like the ideas behind it about just putting things into perspective. And again, for instance, like last year with the coronavirus thing going on where my gym's locked down and there's so much out of my control, it's a good type of philosophy to wrap your head around, again, with things that are within your control. So, worthwhile to read if you're trying to develop mental toughness. There's a few things for you. I'll do a video sometime soon where I take you into my house. I'll show you my bookshelves, show you my Audible account, my Kindle account, and everything else, and you can look through that and maybe get a reading list out of it. But otherwise, guys, that is the video today. So again, developing mental toughness, put it into practice, go do uncomfortable things in your life, be ready and be aware when you start to get mentally weak, and then be ready to override it with something. And again, it may not be the visions like I have it, although I think it can be useful, but find some reason inside of you why you must do this thing that you're trying to accomplish, right? It can't be a kind of want to do it. It has to be a must. something you have to do. So Elijah, hopefully that's useful to you, brother, and I'll talk to you guys next time.